Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football for the Oregon fans who've been rocking with the fellas the last couple of weeks. Y'all probably already know this. The spring game this Saturday, absolutely fired up for. When you look at this football team going into 2025, the talent is real. Now, I don't think the national media really recognizes how talented this football team is because they get kind of hung up on the superficial stuff, looking at the roster and saying, well, you're losing what, 12 guys that are going to be selected to the NFL draft over the next couple of days. No way this team is as talented as they were in the 2024 year. I think you can make the argument. In fact, I think I'm going to make the argument that this team is more talented going into 2025. We just got to figure out what young cats on this roster can go out and play ball when the bullets are live. And Dan Lanning in Oregon, you're going to kind of find that out on Saturday afternoon. Now, I think you want to start with this. Shout out Dan Lanning. Shout out the Oregon Ducks. There are a lot of programs across the country that are not playing their spring game, that are not televising their spring game, that are playing two-hand touch if they are playing their spring game. You go back 12 months ago, that spring game for Oregon was live. Like the pads were popping, and I think we're going to get a very, very similar feel Saturday afternoon for this Oregon Ducks team. And quite frankly, I think you need to do this if you're Dan Lanning because you got so much talent on this football team. You got to figure out what talent can play their best football when the bullets are live, when it's real out there on the football field. We're going to find out a lot about this team going into 2025 on Saturday afternoon. Fired up to get into, kind of the players, the storylines that I'm most excited to monitor. We might go 30 minutes on this episode. I'm going to try to keep it short, but we got a lot to get through in terms of storylines and players that you want to be dialed into on Saturday afternoon. Now, before we get into it, as always, to the Oregon fans, appreciate you guys. And we'll be going live right after, talking about what we saw. Heck, we might even do just a live watch party and kind of talk with you guys in the comment section in terms of what we're seeing. We'll kind of figure that out, but we're going to be talking about it after Saturday's game. No doubt about that. Cannot thank you guys enough for rocking with it. It's been really fun talking this team over the last couple of weeks. The amount of support's been amazing. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, look, if you're an Oregon fan checking out a spring game preview, you probably got some storylines of your own that you're following. Y'all let it fly in the comment section. Those names that y'all put, that's probably what we're going to be talking about during that spring game reaction. Without further ado, let's get into it. Let's start at the quarterback position. And let's start with Dante Moore. What do we want to see from Dante Moore on Saturday? I think it starts with two things. One, show me you have command of the offense. This is year 2 in the Wilstein offense for Dante Moore. Got the opportunity to sit behind one of the more experienced college football quarterbacks we've seen in the history of the sport with Dylan Gabriel. Going into year 2, look, I know that Dante Moore can make those really high-level throws, and we're going to see some of those throws on Saturday afternoon, no doubt about it. We following this kid out of high school. You knew the arm talent was legit. You've seen it in spots for this kid since he's entered the college football landscape. To me, the bigger question is, all right, can we command the offense? Can we make the right decisions? And can we avoid the negative plays? The one thing that I think really got to Dante Moore as a freshman at UCLA was taking a little bit too many sacks. Now, that probably started with the offensive line being a disaster for him when he was a true freshman at UCLA. But you want to see him do the small stuff right because we know he can elevate this offense in a massive way. The throws that you can ask this kid to make, he's going to make some of those. How consistent can we be as a quarterback? That's what I want to see from Dante Moore during Saturday's spring game. And then Austin Novosad, it sounds like he's just steady Eddie. I think Oregon has. I don't think it's just coach speak. I think Dan Lanning believes he can win at a very high level with both Dante Moore and Austin Novosad. But I think all of us recognize that Dante Moore reaching his potential, reaching his ceiling within this Oregon offense, I think gives Oregon the best chance to win a national championship. Now, the other thing I'm kind of interested in is, hey, what does Will Stein do with a talent at quarterback like Dante Moore? Like, you can ask Dante Moore to do things that you probably didn't want to ask Dylan Gabriel to do all that much. Push the ball vertically down the field, push the ball to the boundary. I think you're going to see a little bit more of a dynamic Oregon offense that's attacking the deeper third because one, you have a quarterback that can make those throws, but that's a nice transition to the wide receiver room where you look at this wide receiver room and I got my depth chart put out and we've been making some small adjustments, as we roll through spring practice. The wide receiver depth chart is completely up for grabs. I think going into the spring game, Dakorien Moore and Evan Stewart have kind of showed they're probably the top two wide receivers on this football team. Malik Benson, Jeremiah McClellan, Kyle Casper, Gary Bryant, Jurion Dickey. Like, hey, this is the opportunity in a loaded wide receiver room to show that you can go be the playmaker for this Oregon Ducks team. Now, something different that I think we're going to see from this wide receiver room is one, it's really big and it's really fast. Malik Benson 10-4, Dakorien Moore 10-4. Evan Stewart was a 10-6 in the 100-meter dash coming out of high school. I feel like people forget that. Like this team has a lot of speed on the outside, a lot of verticality to it. And I think the second thing you're going to see is there's probably going to be a little bit more of a rotation within this wide receiver room than we're used to seeing. Go back to 2024 when Tez Johnson was healthy, when Evan Stewart was healthy, and when Trayshawn Holden was healthy. They were the three wide receivers that played a lot of football for Oregon. I think you're going to see a little bit more of a rotation in the wide receiver room because how much talent and depth you have in the room. Hey, but who's going to go and kind of show they can be the guy in the wide receiver room? And I think we're all excited to see Dakorien Moore. Look, I don't think it's crazy to say Dakorien Moore can be the wide receiver one of this offense. It's kind of what we heard coming out of spring. Now we want to see it during the spring game. Another intriguing storyline is Kenny Sadiq as the true tight end one. Like Kenny and Sadiq coming out of high school, I loved him. I think he's gotten better over the last 2 years, and nobody gives him enough credit for how well he does inline blocking. Like I think he's taken some massive strides in that department. I think he's ready to be the all-encompassing tight end one for this football team. Now, what are they going to treat him like and how are they going to use him? Because you can use him a little bit differently than you used a guy like Ferguson last year. Like Ferguson was the chain mover, the middle of the field guy. Like, and that's not a shot at Terrence Ferguson. Like, there's a reason he's going to go to the NFL draft and be picked high and have a good career in the NFL. Kenny Sadiq's just kind of a little bit of a different cat. Works vertically exceptionally well with the 10-7 speed. He's a guy that is arguably the most dynamic player on the offense with the football in his hands. Like that combination of size and speed. Hey, you get this kid the football in space, he's going to be a load to try to deal with. We can use him in different ways than we use the guy like Terrence Ferguson. How do we treat Kenny Sadiq as the true tight end one in this Oregon offense? Running back room. Mekhi Hughes looks like an action figure. I don't know. Y'all got to go on Twitter and just look up what Mekhi Hughes looks like during spring practice. It's about as impressive of a physique as you've seen a running back have. Can he be that true running back one that Oregon went out and grabbed? And then you're hearing great things about Dink Riggs. What's the running back rotation look like? Not a huge storyline, but something worth monitoring. Last one on offense, the offensive line. That it's crazy because you asked me a couple of weeks ago and you say, hey, what do you think about the Oregon offensive line going into 2025? I would have said probably a small downgrade from what we saw in the 2024 year. And that was just me looking at it and saying, well, shoot, you lose two guys that are going to go very high in the NFL draft, especially Josh Connerly, multi-year starters that played very good football for Oregon at the offensive tackle spot. I wasn't sure if Isaiah World and Alex Harkey could come in and kind of pick up where those two left off. I knew it wasn't going to be bad. It wasn't going to be bad. But like, how good was it going to be? Like, what you're hearing coming out of spring is Alex Harkey might be an upgrade from a Johnny Cornelius at right tackle. That's something that I got to see to believe, but you love hearing that coming out of spring. Isaiah World has potential to be a top 10 NFL draft pick after this year. Then you look on the inside, that's clearly better. Like Poncho going into year two, Emmanuel Pregnine coming in, by far your best interior offensive lineman. All of a sudden, it's not that crazy to say that this Oregon offensive line might be better than it was in 2024. And look, if you get this team taking steps in the right direction from what they were in 2024, this team's going to be, we know they're going to be dangerous, but they're going to be dangerous. And I think what's so fascinating kind of transitioning to the defensive line is it's going to be iron sharpening iron. Like NFL versus NFL. Like Alex Harkey, Isaiah World going up against Mateo, Tatum, Blake Purchase, Elijah Rushing. That's going to be a fun battle to watch. To me, with this Oregon defensive line, this is what excites me the most really throughout this Oregon team, is what this defensive line is going to be. I feel like at times Oregon has not been as dominant as they need to be on the defensive line to be a true national championship team. Look, it's gotten better under Dan Lanning. Ain't no question about that. Oregon's defensive line in 2024 was the best version we've seen since Dan Lanning's been in Eugene. Can it get better? Can it get better? I know you lose Jamari Caldwell, Jordan Burch, Derek Carmen. From what you're hearing from the year 2, year 3 guys, that's what excites me the most. We are dealing with a defensive line that is far from being tapped out. There are some teams across the country that we know their defensive line is going to be good, but it's just filled with 4th and 5th year seniors that you're not really sure how much better they're going to get going into 2025. That's the complete opposite from how we have this conversation with this defensive line. I think it starts with Mateo and Tatum. Those guys have been all Big Ten caliber dudes in the 2024 year. They're only going into year 3 of their college football careers. Like, it's not crazy to say Mateo and Tatum get better going into 2025, like 2 all-American caliber edge rushers. Then you look at Elijah Rushing going into year 2, probably the name that has improved the most in the offseason for Oregon. What about Aiden Breland? What about Jericho Johnson on the inside? Tyone Gray. Amari Washington, he's been a stalwart for Oregon. He's only going into year 3. You have so many defensive linemen that are getting better at the sport because they're year 1, year 2, year 3 guys. Which one of those takes that step? And then what does Bear Alexander look like? Bear Alexander, I think Dan Lanning hit. We knew it was maybe a little bit of a risk. Like, you bring in Bear Alexander, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But if it works, like, you're getting an all Big Ten caliber guy. Believe he made the dean's list during the spring semester. Everything you're hearing out of the program is that he's come in and been a model teammate with a model work ethic. This is very well could be the best version of Bear Alexander we've seen. And I'll say this, we've seen some good versions from Bear Alexander. Like, go back to 2023 USC film. He was very good for USC, a little bit inconsistent, but was very good. Like, what happens if we get the best version of Bear going into 2025? That's something to monitor as well. Linebacker room. To me, it's Devin Jackson. Devin Jackson took a step in 2024. Played almost 500 snaps for that football team. Only missed 6% of his tackles. He has, we're looking for, hey, who in the linebacker room can be an all-American caliber guy? We know what Bryce Betcher is. He's kind of that example of a guy that's going into, I believe, his 5th year of college football. And it's like, I don't know if we're going to see a different version of Bryce Betcher, although it's worth noting that this is the first offseason Bryce Betcher's only focused on the sport of football, which maybe you do get a bump from Bryce Betcher. But Devin Jackson's the guy. Got better in 2024. Can he take another step in 2025? Because if he does, and it's a guy that it could be an all Big Ten linebacker, potentially all-American linebacker for Oregon. And then what does the depth look like? Outside of those two, Bryce Betcher and Devin Jackson, we just have not seen much from these linebackers. That doesn't mean they're bad. It just means we haven't seen a ton of them. Like, who's linebacker 3, linebacker 4? Who is ready to play consistent snaps for Oregon? Secondary. Number 1, just excited to see what this unit looks like physically. Like the defensive line, this secondary is by far the most physically impressive unit we've seen under Dan Lanning. Like, you can tell Dan Lanning's been putting in work in the portal and on the high school recruiting trail, recruiting different caliber dudes from an athletic profile standpoint. You look at Effie, you look at Naheem Offord, you look at Dakota Fields or Brandon Finney or Trey McNutt, Kingston Lopa. These guys look different. They just look different from guys like Kobe Savage and Tasheem Johnson last year. And again, that's not a shot at Kobe Savage or Tasheem Johnson like we've been saying all spring. It's just these guys have much more upside than you had in the 2024 year. You were just a little too small, a little too slow in the secondary last year. Hey, we got to have guys that can physically match up with Ohio State, match up with Texas, and all that size and speed that those programs have. Those are the teams we have to go through when we're trying to win a national championship. I think Oregon, from an athletic profile standpoint, has the bodies. Now, who are those bodies going to be? we've said Ifio and Dylan Tiemann, those are probably your locks. Like everything we've heard out of spring practice from both of them, it's like they're some of the best players on this football team. What does Naheem Offord look like? What does Trey McNutt look like? Kingston Lopa going into year 2, arguably the highest ceiling in that room. Who's going to step up? Very similar to the wide receiver, and we are incredibly deep. We are incredibly talented. Now we got to figure out who those guys are going to be on Saturdays that play their best football when the bullets are live and the lights are bright. We're going to find out a lot about this football team. Y'all can already tell I'm kind of excited. Hey, we worked through it a little bit faster than I thought we were going to. 15 minutes and change. Not bad. We will hop on Saturday. Maybe a little live watch party if the Oregon fans are interested. If y'all are, let it fly in the comment section. We'll certainly be talking about it. Just depends how we're going to go about it. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Fired up. Y'all can tell. I'm sure many of y'all are too. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.